Ready to dig in the Word this morning? Amen. Turn your Bibles to Galatians chapter 4. We'll be in verses 11 through 20 this morning. And in Galatians 4, as I talked about last week, Paul was really making the case that with all that God has done, why would anybody turn their back on him, turn their back on the cross? And this morning, Paul's going to really ramp it up. He's really got a word for the Galatians. And he's even going to talk about suffering this morning, because when Paul first met the Galatians, he was going through a health problem, a little bit of a health crisis, so to say. And so we get to talk about suffering this morning. You know, the gospel and suffering for God's glory. Is it possible as Christians to suffer and God to get the glory out of it? Now, suffering doesn't always mean that we're going to be going through something real heavy and something serious, something life-altering, life-changing. Sometimes suffering just means something's really just interrupting your life. You know, it's just something you're going through. And, I was thinking about a story for this morning, an opening story this morning, but the church kind of played that out for me this morning, because if you walk in church this morning, I know there's a lot of people watching online, but it kind of looks like year one a little bit. We got the Gibson family and some visitors, but not so much because we have church family. And so, but there's a lot of people missing this morning. And one by one this morning, Rami and I get these text messages one after another, and it's like, my God, what is going on around here? Chris and Brooke was in the ER all night with Fiona because she got something stuck up her nose, so they joined the Up the Nose Club that some of us parents know something about. That's actually a thing. Like most families at one point have wanted their kids or something will just experiment with that. And so we're in the ER. Thankfully, whatever it was popped out just before 9 this morning. Corn kernel popped out before 9 this morning, so that's good, because Fiona wasn't going to sprout corn out of her ears or anything. But anyways, keep Brooke and Chris encouraged. The Cape runs are home this morning. Debbie's not feeling it. She's wheezing. Mayama had a terrible fall a week ago. We're going to go visit her after service. So you got those kind of things going on. But then one by one, every kid in the church this week just about has gotten sick with something. It's like one after another. There's fevers and flus and RSVs and all this kind of stuff. And so you look around the church and you want to see one of those Sundays where you feel like, where you really recognize a small church thing, is when all the kids in the church get sick and all the families are at home. And you look around like, oh, mercy. So if you don't see somebody here this morning, just send them some love and encouragement and just let them know that we're thinking about them. But, we suffer so many different ways. Some of you know what it's like to have a health issue that you can't control and it just never seems to go away. Some of you cause some self-inflicted suffering, make choices you make. Or maybe it's something that's completely out of your control, like what Paul was dealing with this morning. But if we all know something about suffering, is if you suffer long enough, there's always a testimony on the end of it. Amen. But we don't like that in the beginning of suffering, because when we start going through something, I don't even want the testimony. Just leave me alone, God. I don't want the testimony. But God always works everything out for our good. Amen. So turn with me to Galatians chapter 4, verses 11 through 20. So Paul goes to the Galatians. Remember, we're picking up here, and he's kind of his letter. He's correcting the church. He said, I'm afraid that I've labored over you in vain. Brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong. You knew it because of a bodily ailment that I preached the gospel to you at first. And although my condition was a trial to you, you did not scorn or despise me, but received me as an angel of God in Christ Jesus. What then has become of your blessedness? For I testify to you that, if possible, you would have gouged out your eyes and given them to me. Have I then become your enemy by telling you the truth? They make much of you, but for no good in purpose. They want to shut you out, that you may make much of them. It is always good to be made much of for a good purpose, and not only when I'm present with you. My little children, from whom I am again in the anguish of childbirth, until Christ is formed in you, I wish I could present with you now and change my tone, for I'm perplexed about you. So Paul sees the Galatians, as we talked about all the way since the beginning, the Galatian church got infiltrated by some Judaizers. These are religious Jews. These are Jewish men who are trying to take the Gentile believers, because the church is made up of Jews and Gentiles, and these Jewish believers are trying to tell the Gentile believers that in order for you to really be Christian, don't listen to Paul, you need to follow the law. So they wanted all these different people to get circumcised and follow these different practices and really earn their way to heaven. And as we saw in the first couple of weeks, that the gospel is freely given to us, that God does the justification work, that's freely poured out on us. It's by faith we're saved in Jesus, amen, by grace. And so Paul's kind of perplexed. Like he ended the chapter earlier in the chapter we talked about last week. He looks at him and says, okay, for all that God has done for you, so God has forgiven you, he's saved you, he's justified you, he's redeemed you, he's built a church here in the city. Like, for all that God is doing through you, why are you going backwards? So Paul says, I'm kind of perplexed. He actually says, I'm in the anguish of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. I love the fact that he says that. We're going to look at that here in a little bit. But he feels like, have I labored in vain? Like, I've gone on at this effort to plant this church and share the gospel with you and tell you the way of Jesus, and look at how you're acting. That'd be a tough place for any pastor to be, or the church. Yet I tell you this morning, I've been there. Abandoning the gospel leads to hostility towards people we once loved. If you're not following the gospel, you're going to lead to hostility towards people you once loved. And this is what Paul's dealing with. So here we're given the insights this morning how Paul planted churches. When Paul went around planting churches, Paul he would have skipped Galatia. Galatia was too little of a city. Paul always went to the major metropolitan parts of the cities, the big cities. And he always planted in the biggest cities, thinking the bigger city would then trickle down and reach the little cities and those around there. So Paul did not have it. It wasn't his intent to land in Galatia. It was only by the will of God that he ended there. We see in the book of Acts. So what we see first this morning is the gospel ministry has to be flexible. Anybody like it when God changes your plans? Or when you plan to change last second? What about it if God calls you? How many of you God called you right now and said, I want to pick you up and I want to move you to some place that you've never been before because you're going to live there? How many of you would be like, okay? Some would and some wouldn't, right? Some of us are that. Right? Yep. So a ministry that's energized by the gospel is flexible and adaptable with everything apart from the gospel. It's not tied to a specific part of culture or custom. Its leaders can come and truly live among them. What Paul did is anytime he went and planted somewhere, he became like the people. Now, it's not that he watered down the gospel. The gospel stayed exactly the same, but Paul adapted himself to culture. And as I read this chapter, I think to myself this morning, I get this, because you know what? When we moved down to West Virginia, we heard how the Southerners aren't going to accept Northerners. We heard all these stories about how different it is and all that kind of stuff. And, it's right, a shopping cart being a buggy. I do find that strange still. It's still a shopping cart, no matter what you call it. A pop is a Coke. If I'm drinking Pepsi, it's not a Coke, but I guess it's still a Coke. How about a sauce and slaw, please? Sauce and slaw. And I'll tell you this morning, I still can't get with it. Like, I love West Virginia hot dogs now. I love Midway. I can go to Midway and eat one of their chili dogs that needs a mustard all day long. But the slaw part still, I can't do it. I get it on the side. It's just too different for me. But that's because I'm coming from the world of Chicago dogs. So you look at me like, well, you take an all-beef hot dog and you put mustard, onion, relish, tomato, pickle, spear, and all this other stuff on there. So it's like some people call it garden dog. And look, they're already making faces. You guys can't see them live, but some people are making faces. So hot dogs are different within 400 miles of the country. What about a bushel and a peck? Now, I didn't know that till recently, till the lady at the farmer market told me that she asked me if I wanted a bushel and a peck one day. We were buying tomatoes for salsa. I said, what's a peck? She's like, you don't know what a peck is? No, I know what a peck, like a bird pecking or meat pecking, No, that's not it. Just peck means you want more. It means you want a bunch more. I said, that's pretty cool, a bushel and a peck. I've been asking people all week, do you know what a bushel and a peck is? And half do and half don't. And so you can see how different culture is. Pepperoni rolls. Up north, we had these things called pasties, and they're like they're a pillow of dough, but inside there is like, let's say you had pot roast, you had your gravy and your meat and potatoes, all that stuffed in a hot pocket, or maybe chicken, pot pie in a hot pocket. It's that kind of thing, and that's what the miners and the people up there, that's what they eat. But down here you get pepperoni rolls. I love pepperoni rolls, especially if they come from Camden Corner. If you wanna make me happy, buy me 3 or 4 of those pepperoni rolls from Camden Corner. I'll be set for. They're awesome. I love them. What about road signs that say we have ramps? Now here's the deal. I see a road sign that says we have ramps. I'm like, yeah, Dixie has it. Let's go see if we can jump the Jeep. So you pull over and you're like, where's the ramp? I want to jump. It's like, no, it's an onion. What do you mean it's an onion? You said you got ramps. I want to bring my bike over here. And it's like, no, it's ramps. It's an onion. So, but in West Virginia, it's common to drive down the road, especially if you go to between Barbersville and Huntington. That one little farmer's market on the side had the sign that we have ramps. And I was like, it was pretty cool learning what ramps were this year. No idea. Learned it. Living backwards, my favorite term I learned down here. Chicago dogs. What about when you can't explain something? I love this a lot because I use this a lot. Earl has taught me a brand new language that I love. But when I can't explain something, I don't know what it is, I say that doohickey. Doohickey. Or the duplachi. Or whatever it is. And it just, those words are just like, I love them. See, go ahead. Go ahead. It's like these things that you learn as you pick it up in culture, man. It's not just the food. The food is incredible and so on. But, the differences are awesome. But even with those little differences that we like to have fun with, like eating slaw on a hot dog. I don't know who invented that, but even sauce. I learned this last couple of years that sauce can mean spaghetti sauce or chili, depending on who's making it. Some people taste like ragu out of a jar, and other people taste like bona fide chili. I like Midway because it tastes like a chili dog. And in Michigan, we have chili dogs. We put chili and onion, and they put cheese inside the slaw. It's almost the same thing. But it's so awesome. But you know what I enjoy the most is the people. See, when I moved to CK, it was for the people. I moved here because I believe that CK needs Jesus. I moved here because I knew the gospel needed to be preached out of this pulpit and out of this church again, and that the church needed to reconnect itself with the community. I knew that there was the only thing that mattered was Christ's love and his saving and the salvation that he offers all that believe. And look what God has done the last couple of years by taking a chance. Lord said, okay, go plant this church in Canova, West Virginia. And I remember the first time they brought it up, I'm like, where's Canova? I never heard of it. Why do I want to go there? But now I'm like, I love it here. When I say that I love you guys and love you as a church and those around our community, I truly do. This week for my birthday, we were at the ball game the other night, and Pat and the kids got me a cake, and they gave me a CK hat. Now, the CK hat is actually the first thing somebody from CK has given me since I've been here. So this hat is actually probably more meaningful to me than most people. It was just a baseball hat. I'm like, no way, man. It's like a gift from the community. I feel like I did something. It's awesome. So, I mean, it's so cool to be connecting the community. Last night we had our movie night, and we had more people at the movie night than we had any other movie night so far. It was great. People that we didn't even know that we got to meet and give out some invites and talk to, and concessions did really well. We just get these opportunities to do things, and you see God opening up the doors here in a way that just bringing a great church back together in its community. One thing I love about this church is that when something's going on, you go in the family group, and there's just prayer requests after prayer requests, and there's 20, 30 people praying for each one at a time. I swear prayer requests land in that group, 2.2 seconds later, somebody's already on it saying, I'm praying for you. It's so loving and so awesome. But I also understand where Paul hurts because I labor at times because I also see so many that don't get it. So many people around us that choose worthless things over Jesus. Every excuse to be out of church and away from church and not come to church. Every reason to ignore the gospel and not accept the gospel or not even want to hear it. Even those people when you're out evangelizing that'll laugh at you for bringing up an invite to church. I get it. I labor over that. My pain hurts. My pain hurts not only here in the beginnings for some of our own people who I believe might not still get it. They might not have gone all the way in yet, but for the community around us because we haven't even begun to reach our community. So my heart breaks, and I'm burdened by what God can we do to reach our community in a greater way. Well, one thing is some of the things we're doing really well, is like Paul did, is we're becoming part of the community. We're becoming a part of the community. It's not like, imagine if Rob and I were the kind of people that were legalistic. Like, guess what? If you're going to come to our church, you got to dress and talk like us. And you know what? We're next door. We lock ourselves in the house. And Halloween comes, we turn off all the lights and lock the doors, and we don't interact with the community. Forget going to ball games, all that kind of stuff. Like, if you want to come to church, you need to come to me. And it was like sharing that like that on the gospel. If you want to hear the gospel, you got to come in here. I'm not going to meet you out there. Can you imagine that? Yet there's many places that are like that. And it breaks my heart to see some people have that experience where it's like, well, you got to become like me before I become like you. And that's not what Paul is saying, man. Paul is saying gospel ministry is flexible. You need to be part of your culture. You need to be part of your culture. As we look to next year, we want to look at ways to get more into our culture, to more into our community. What can we do besides the food pantry to make a difference in CK? What is out there that God wants to do? These are the things I'm praying for right now. Saying, God, what more can we do to really get in the thick of our culture where people really need to hear the gospel? And I respond. And I don't think we've scratched the surface yet, but I think we will. Second, the gospel ministry is transparent. Paul says, become as I am. So Paul became like they were. He became like Galatia, ate their food, he lived their culture. Each where he went, he'd get a job in that city and so on. So he truly lived with the people. But then he says in verse 12, brothers, I entreat you, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong. This is where Paul looks at them and says, I wish you guys would understand that if you would follow my example, you would follow Jesus. Paul wasn't saying become like him because he's perfect in any way. Paul wanted them to follow his love for Jesus, to follow his love for mission and for ministry and for the things he was doing, for his love for people. Sometimes our words are not sufficient alone in persuading others to Christ. Do you know that your witness is very powerful? The way you live, the way you act, the way you walk, and the way you talk and you live around people is what people see first. You are a living Bible. You are a living witness. So people are going to see the first thing they're going to get about the gospel is they're going to get by the way you look and the way you act and the way you treat people and so on. And so our witness matters. Our witness matters greatly. Generally, we find faith through relationships with joyful but flawed people, don't we? Most of you probably, if you have a testimony, somebody led you to Christ, that person wasn't perfect in any way, but they were following Jesus. Sometimes you might know that person is joyfully flawed. They're a great Christian, their Bible's worn out, but in no way are they perfect. But you know what? They got something you can follow because they've been following Jesus for a long time and they're faithful. They know what it's like to go through a struggle or a suffer or whatever it is and keep the faith. Do you know somebody like that? Somebody you call a hero in your faith this morning? Somebody worth following? Somebody who's not perfect, but they're joyful? They're not perfect, but they're serious? This is not arrogance. If Paul had only said, become as I without being like them, it would not have made a lot of sense. But Paul showed them how flexible he was by adapting himself to culture and bringing the gospel to culture. He also set an example that they could follow, an example of grace. He gave them a ton of grace. Follow his example as a disciple, his prayer life, his study, and living it out. And I say the same thing as your pastor. Like I stand there and tell you this morning, I do not have it all together. I am flawed, by the way. I mean, even though I'm ordained, I'm not perfect. I'm going to testify back there. But you know what? I do love Jesus more than anything. My prayer life, my Bible study life, my devotion to my family, my community, and his church, and that kind of stuff, I do believe you can follow that example. I do believe anybody would be hard-pressed to say that those things weren't true about me. And that's what Paul's getting at. You could follow my discipleship, the way I share my faith, the way I talk about Jesus, the way I want to share Jesus with other people, the way we're down at the ball field. I don't even have a kid on the ball team. Right? I don't. But I'm sitting there at every single game watching the games. Why? Because you're part of the community. You're rooting on kids I don't even know. Like, hey, go, and watching Chad do really well. It's just because that's what loving your neighbor is all about. But, whose example are you following? In your life, whose example are you following? Every disciple has another disciple they follow. There's somebody that you look up to, somebody's example you can follow, somebody, often it's multiple different people. I have different men of God in my life that I get something different from each of them. But there's something I can follow in them because I know they're following Jesus. So Paul was telling them, you can follow me. Even though they knew Paul wasn't perfect, because when Paul came on them, Paul was dealing with a health issue. Now, the Bible doesn't tell us exactly what Paul was dealing with. Many of them would say maybe malaria or something like that because of the mosquito-borne illnesses back in that day from his travels. It could have been an eye problem. I mean, theologians and reformers, they've been debating this for years, what it could have been. We just don't know. He had a stomach issue. Nobody knows 100% for sure because Paul just never laid it out. And Mark, or whoever's running with them, never told us. We need to take a diversion here because they're being confronted with one of the most challenging and most troubling parts of Christian teaching, namely that God allows suffering and difficulties of the world in the lives of Christians. Nobody ever wants to hear that God will allow you to go through something. So we all want our Christian walk to be roses, right? It's like, oh, it's going to be great all the time, and I'm walking on bubbles and whatever. And it's like, no, there's some of us and some of you, you know what it's like that you go through some things. You go through some things. Romans 8:28 says this, for we know that those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. God's working it out. If you're going through something this morning, I want you to rest easy knowing that God is working it out because you have a testimony that's being written. And you have a testimony that's being written. You have something that God is doing in your life. And you know what? Often when God puts us through something like suffering, I'm going to talk about that more in a second, God does that because you're meant to model for somebody else what it means to be faithful. And you won't be as faithful as you are until you go through that trial. I'm grateful this morning to see Mike back. Mike has been dealing with his breathing the last couple of weeks, and he just decided enough's enough, so get behind the drums this morning. He was playing drums, even though he's still having breathing problems. Why not just stay home this morning? Because he loves Jesus, loves the church. That's what it means. And plus, he had to get away from Carrie and come to church, right? Teasing you, Carrie. Carrie's been good at taking care of him. Give her credit. No, but it's like Mike is a brother. If you get to know him, he knows what it's like to suffer with a health problem. And still serve pantry and serve the church and play the drums and have a desire to do things even though he's working through it. And that's hard. That's hard. Some of you might be going through something this morning and you're like, that's just too hard for me. And maybe you have the ability to stand. God does not promise to bless Christians by removing the suffering. Here's the deal. When suffering, whether it be an illness, emotional, physical, financial, whatever the suffering is that you're going through, God does not promise to take it away from you, but he promises to bless you through it. God doesn't promise that everything's going to be perfect all the time. I wish I could say that. I wish I could put on my prosperity gospel robes this morning and assure you that if you gave me a check for $99.95, everything's going to be awesome. It doesn't work that way. This is where I think that if you've ever heard of prosperity gospel, those guys will tell you, oh, it's good all the time, Joel Osteen and all those kind of guys. No, my Bible says that God's going to allow you to go through some stuff because there's a testimony that's being written. And Paul's a prime example of that. Jesus suffered not so that we might suffer, but also that in our own suffering we become like him. God uses our suffering to bring about good. Sometimes this involves circumstances. Paul's illness brought him many new friends and a successful ministry in Galatia, but other times the good God works is in our character. Listen to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12 this morning as he describes this situation. 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10 says this, so to keep me from being conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from being conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. When I am weak, then I am strong. Paul's no stranger this morning to have gone through some stuff. And I don't know if you've been in here in that situation where you're going through a health situation, an illness, and you've prayed and asked God to take it away, and he hasn't taken it away yet. And sometimes that rocks our faith. I know for me, for 20 years now, I've been dealing with lymphedema on both of my legs. And my legs swell and they hurt every day. And you guys see me wear the braces and so on, the reps, whatever. And you know, I occasionally get sick every so many weeks and so on. And, you know, for 20 years I've been going through this. And for 20 years I've been in ministry and doing other stuff. And I've been anointed and prayed on for healing and for miracles more than probably 24 times. Every time I go to a camp meeting or somebody, just like this last one, somebody sits me down in a chair, usually my wife's idea, somebody pours oil over my forehead, and they pray that God just removes the lymphedema from my legs, and I won't have this problem anymore. Well, God has saw fit not to do that. I just spent all of last week pretty sick. And I can stand there this morning and be like, man, this just stinks. Like, I'm tired of going through this. I'm going to go on social media. I'm going to rant about it. Tell the world how bad my life is. And this is like, why doesn't God love me? And, you know, you can get in that place pretty quickly. But I know that every single time I've had to deal with this over the years, it's caused me to pray harder. It has brought me to my knees in ways that I can't tell you that I probably wouldn't have been in my own way. It's also caused me to trust other people, to love my wife more and lean on her more than she deserves at times, as I need her to help me with different things. I mean, it's taught me a lot about being weak. It's taught me a lot about being grace. And for that sake, would I trade what I'm going through for healing? Maybe not. Maybe what the Lord has been teaching me over the last 20 years going through this, and why he's still writing my story, is that his grace is made sufficient in my weakness. Because there's many Sundays or Wednesdays and so on where, you've seen me sick on some Sundays. I come in here and it's like, I really should be home in bed because I'm running a fever and stuff like that. But I want to preach. I want to show Jesus how much I love him. And sometimes you just have to make the decision that I got to give him a walk. I could lay down and tell you how bad it is, and Paul would tell you, this is one thing I love about Paul, is Paul's been shipwrecked, he's been beaten, he's facing calamity and troubles and illness and pain and all these kind of things. God shipwrecked him. He ended up in Galatia. In that moment, God threw his plans in a whole tailspin, but then he ended up in a place where he planted a church and people came to Christ. Like what if in your most brokenness and your most weakness, that's where you lead the most people to Jesus? What if you could look at your health issue, your emotional, whatever it is this morning that you're going through, that you want God to take away, that he hasn't taken away, and it's so difficult, and that is the very part of your life that God is going to use to lead the most people to Jesus? What if you're going through treatments in the hospital or whatever, and God wants you to use the room where you're getting in your injections as a pulpit? What if it's, instead of going on social media and telling everybody how rotten and horrible and stinky the world is, you went on there and say, man, God is so good. Some of you here this morning, you have something you're suffering with. It'd be an illness, because I know I'm not the only one, a physical pain or emotional. You know what it's like to be down and not feel good. Maybe you feel misunderstood, but God understands. He will use your suffering to bring glory. Don't give up. Oh, wait, I got to repeat that. That was too good to let it go. Maybe you feel misunderstood, but God understands. He will use your suffering to bring glory. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't throw the towel in. Realize that when you're fighting whatever it is, it's the Lord that fights with you. Paul wasn't alone. Jesus was with him. It's the Lord that adds to the numbers and build churches, so the Lord was clearly with him. So what is it that you might be going through? You can either whine about it. Here's the deal. You can either whine about it, or what's the word? What's the West Virginia word for whining? Waller. You can waller in it. You can whine or waller in it. Right? You can whine or waller in it. Or you can give praise. Get it? You can whine. You can tell me how bad it is. And some of us, gotta admit, we're really good at whining about stuff. Like we can really easily get in a place where I can whine all day long about how this stinks. But you know what? Who am I going to lead to Christ like that? See, I can whine about it or I can give praise. So what if I said, you know what, this last week I had to do this. I said, Lord, I don't feel, it's crazy. It's my birthday this last week. And so leading up to my birthday, I've been sick since Sunday night. Another bout with cellulitis, so I'm running a fever, sick and all that kind of stuff. And so the day from my birthday, I just prayed to God and said, God, I don't know what you want from me this year. I hope it's less of this and more of something else. But whatever it is, God, I'll do. Because that's my attitude. Whatever, God, you want. And all day long, I'm on social media. I start seeing like the Daniel plan pop up. I start seeing one of our food blogs for healthy eating. These things, I haven't seen these in a couple of years. We haven't done a Daniel plan in like 4 or 5 years. All these little things popped up. And I hear God speaking to me saying, just take better care of yourself. Like, what if some of my suffering could be relieved this morning if I did better for myself? If I didn't eat things I shouldn't be eating, if I didn't do things I shouldn't be doing. That actually did my part, took better care of myself. Maybe when I take better care of myself, I might find a healing this morning. But I'm saying, don't give up. So are you a person this morning who likes to whine about things? Or are you a praiser? A whiner or a praiser? I wish more of us were praisers. More of us just had that testimony. God is working it out. I'm going to get some praise. I'm going to raise a hallelujah in the presence of my victory, right? Should have been said this morning. Here's another thing we learned in this chapter is ministry is on God's timing. It's God's timing. There's also a great reminder that ministry does not happen strictly according to human plan, because Paul had planned to go somewhere else. He had a bigger idea, a bigger city, a bigger place that he was going to. And yet in God's timing, God said, nope, you're going to go visit the Galatians. And you're going to visit the people in the Galatians. Well, that's what God does sometimes. I love baseball. Our kids, where's Chad? Oh, he's not in here. So they're at the age now where they got live pitching. And let me tell you, some of those kids pitching should not be pitching because they're throwing some pretty wild balls. And so many of our kids, they get pegged in the arm, the back, the butt, the leg, the ankle. The other day, the umpire got hit pretty hard and bounced up under his mask and almost knocked him out. Like, there's some pitches going on there. Now, there's some kids like Chad Michael. Chad Michael gets hit with the ball. He's like, just keeps on walking. It's not even a thing. A little tough guy, right? He's like, looks back at the pitcher, so I'm going to get you later. There's other kids that get hit with the ball, and they whine. They fall out. They protest. They storm off the field. They don't ever want to play again. They get back in the batter box. They're a little afraid to swing, so you step, instead of stepping in the box, you're stepping outside the box and so on, and that's understandable. But I love to see those kids that will take it and then just walk it off. They take it and they walk it off, and they go get on first base, and they go start running the bases. And then the next time up the bat, man, they know they're a little nervous to be in the box, but they get back in the box. They get back in the box. They get back in the box. I believe that God sometimes throws us curveballs too. Sometimes God throws us a wild ball. Sometimes God throws us something that we didn't see coming and we don't know what to do with it. But are we going to whine about it or are we going to catch it? And if we catch it, what are we going to do with it? This does teach us that we must be very relaxed and willing to let God edit our plans. See, if you're honest this morning, you don't like that. Like, we all have plans for our life. There's things that you want to do. There's things you want to accomplish, whatever it is. And sometimes you're just going about it and you think you got it all figured out, and God just turns the whole thing upside down. And at that moment, you got that, oh, my God. Like, couldn't you just let me have what I want? And then God looks down and says, no, I got something better for you. But we don't like that because sometimes it'll flip our jobs upside down. You'd be working all of a sudden, you lose your job, and you're like, what? All of a sudden, the next job's a better job. Sometimes he does it with our finances, or sometimes he does it with our kids. Sometimes you're just going about life, and all of a sudden, your kid, just something happens. And turns the next couple of weeks of your life around because they break a bone, sprain an ankle, or something like that, and you got to deal with it. You can either whine about it, or you can give praise. God throws us a curveball, and some of us get hit with it, and we just walk it off. Other of us get hit with it, man, we just walk off and protest and just quit. Some of us, we're going through some kind of suffering. There's something going on in our life. And what we need to do is we need to dig into our faith. We need to have the kind of faith that we're just going to walk it off. We're going to keep running. But so many of us, we just want to give up. So many of us are like that kid who gets to the ball. We just want to crawl into fetal position on the ground and cry about it. And I'm saying, don't cry about it this morning. Choose to praise about it and know that God is working in your situation. As much as he adjusted Paul's and worked in Paul's situation, he's doing something with you. And God's doing that because you got a testimony. Now, Paul had to adjust their attitudes in verses 15 to 20. He tells them, what has become your blessedness? For I testify that if possible, you have gouged out your eye and given it to me. When they first met Paul, Paul was going through this health issue, and they were so welcoming that they took care of him. They set him up. They would have gouged out their eyes if he needed an eyeball. It's like, you know what? I need a new pair of legs. I'm going to get the saw. Who's giving me some legs this morning? Anybody? Volunteers in church? Give me some legs this morning? They were like that. They what? I'd be like this one. I'm testifying my. I take those legs. Why not? So Paul goes on to tell you, 17, they make much of you, but for no good purpose. And here's what he's getting at. He said these Judaizers were telling him what they wanted to hear. They were filling their ears with all kinds of nonsense and just making much of them and telling them what they wanted to hear and all this kind of stuff. And Paul says, that just doesn't do anything. Why have I become your enemy if I'm telling you the truth? And that's a hard place for a pastor to be, because there is times where I have to tell you, well, all the time, but there is times where I really have to tell you the truth. And I'm going to say something to you that you're just not going to like because you don't want to hear it, because you got some sin or something going on in your life, and I'm just going to call you out and tell you what it is, and you're like, oh, that Pastor Bob said that. I've been so many times over the years, I become your enemy because I told you the truth. I only told you the truth because I love you, because I care about you, because I care about your salvation. I care about your walk with God. I care about you getting to heaven. And I care about you getting to heaven so much that I'm going to tell you when you're doing something wrong. So if you're messing up, that's my job to tell you. That's what a shepherd is. That's what a pastor is. So Paul is pleading with them, saying, how have I become your enemy? I just been telling you the truth. I told you all about Jesus and the gospel and justification and who God is. I've preached the gospel to you. We planted a church. Everything was going well. How then does this happen? You know what it is? Because they took their eyes off the gospel. And instead of putting their eyes on Jesus, they had their eyes on themselves. And they had their eyes on religion. So Paul says, my little children, for him again in anguish of childbirth. Paul is just hurting over this until Christ is formed in you. That is my greatest passion for you guys. My greatest passion is this, that Christ would be formed in you. See, I'm not here to build a church of a bunch of Christians or a bunch of religious people or whatever it is. My job is to preach the gospel and disciple so that Christ will be formed in you. And what that means is you become like Jesus. You actually start talking like him, thinking like him, living like him. Like Christ was formed in you in such a way that when I see you and everybody else sees you, they see God's Son. The way you act, the way you talk, the way you deal with suffering and everything else like that. It's all Christ-centered because Christ was formed in you so much that you're just living like him. You're the full embodiment of Christ-likeness. I'm in anguish now for so many of our people in the church who claim to follow Jesus but live backwards lives. Who claim to follow Jesus and for some reason just keep doing the very things that should have been buried in the beginning. Like, I'm in anguish until, like Paul's saying, until Christ is formed in you, because when Christ is formed in you, that's when you're going to be transformed in his likeness. That's when you're going to get the victory. That's when everything changes. Like those are like negative thoughts and negative opinions and all this just drama and all whatever it is. Like, all that would be gone if Christ was formed in you. When you got up each day, you would think like him, which means you wouldn't see what's wrong in the world, you'd see the possibility. Well, you would see struggles and trials and you would adapt. When you go through something, you wouldn't whine about it. You give God the glory and praise and say, okay, God, I don't know why you put me through this, but to you be the glory forever, amen. Has Christ been formed in you yet this morning? That's my goal for you, is that Christ will be formed in you. That you'd be so much like Christ, man. Paul came to them at a time he was hurting, and they blessed him by providing for him. They received him as he was sent by God. Their care for him was so great that they would have gouged out an eye, because Paul possibly might have just had a vision problem. We don't know. But through the false teaching, they were falling away. Through the false teaching. You have to go back through Galatians and accept the gospel by faith, and faith in Jesus. And say that, you know what, if Christ is going to be formed in me, then this is the way I'm going to live. Christ in me, Christ through me, Christ before me. It's all about Jesus. I'm going to love like him. I'm going to act like him. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to share like him. If Christ is formed in me, I'm going to share like him. And Paul's crying out, and I get that as a pastor, because, man, my heart just breaks, because I know abandoning the gospel leads to hostility towards other people. The abandoning the gospel, when you ignore the gospel, is the reason why you can't have victory in your life. It's the reason why you can't overcome sin. It's the reason why you're struggling, you do temptation and sin, and just these kind of things, is because you really have not fully given your life to Jesus yet. You've given part of it, but not all of it. And when Christ was formed in you, is that moment of surrender where you looked at God and said, God, I just need all of you. Jesus, I want all of you. Let every ounce of my body be filled with your presence from this day forward. Remove from me all sin, temptation, and just whatever it is that's getting in the way. Lord, I need you to replace that. And you know what I know according to my Bible? When you pray that prayer and you mean that with all your heart, God's going to do a second work in your life. You're going to be so full of the Holy Spirit from that moment on that whatever you struggle with will be gone. That's a promise. Even if you're going through something this morning, struggling, suffering, there's Jesus. I want you to hear that this morning. Even if you're suffering, going through something this morning, there's Jesus. He's there for you. He's got a plan for you. You can choose the whine or you can choose the praise. That's up to you. But you get your praise on and watch your testimony, because God wants to lead somebody to Christ in the middle of your situation. Are you willing? This might challenge you to say, are you willing to allow your suffering to be a testimony? Are you willing to go to somebody and tell them, like, I know what it's like not to breathe this morning, but man, I'm worshiping. I know what it's like to walk in that pain, but I'm still standing. I know what it's like to overcome addiction. I want to tell you about that. I know what it's like to have marriage problems and overcome those. I want to tell you about that. I know what it's like to beat cancer or whatever you're going through, and it's like you're going to tell somebody about that. And when you tell somebody about that, who gets the glory? God gets the glory, amen? So if God is writing your story this morning, be faithful each day and let him finish it, no matter what you're going through, amen? Let's pray this morning as the worship team heads back up. God, I praise you this morning that you're still writing my story. And God, you're writing each of our stories, God. And God, I praise you this morning that, God, you don't promise to bubble wrap us or protect us from the world, that we live in a broken, fallen world, and there's many things that come against us. God, give us the strength, God, to choose not to whine about it, but to praise about it, to give you the glory, to give you the room to write our story. God, that even in a moment of our weakness, we know that Jesus is with us. And if he is with us, then everything's going to be okay. Lord, give us the strength to feel your presence. God, I pray for somebody this morning who's dealing worse than my leg issue or Mike's breathing issue. Maybe it's bodily pains or it's cancer. It's just something even worse, God, that we can't even imagine. God, I pray that you'd give them the strength to praise. God, I pray that you'd give them the strength to trust that you're writing their story and that what they're going through is going to tell a testimony, God. God, I pray that you would give us each the strength that no matter what we're going through, it's in that brokenness and that weakness that we can share the gospel, that we could tell somebody else that where we find our faith, where we find our healing, where we find our grace, where we find our forgiveness, where we find our purpose is in Jesus, we pray. Lord, strengthen us, Lord. Lord, I also pray for the burden that Paul had that Christ be formed in us. Lord, I know that burden just burns so deeply inside of me that I want nothing more than our people to have Christ formed inside of them. For them to become so much like you, Jesus, it's gonna light their whole worlds on fire. Lord, give us that hunger this morning to be more like you, to stand on the gospel, to not walk away from it, Lord. Lord, I pray that we wouldn't listen to any voices of the world and anybody else that would tell us to do anything differently, that, Lord, we would hear your voice. Lord, we would hear your voice that says, I love you, I forgive you, and I have a plan for you. And Lord, I pray that each one of us would have patience as you're working out our situation, God. Whether you choose to heal us now or at a later time, we would have patience and we would have trust, knowing that it's you who has us. For you declare in your word, God, that you work for the good for all those you love. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.